On mute. Good evening, good evening, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday night book love. My name is Evangeline Clark, and I will be doing the book love for tonight. We will be looking into the book of Genesis. We're going to go to the book of Genesis, and I want you to join me as we study tonight the book of Genesis. And we're going to be looking at a very familiar story. We're going to be looking at the story with Abraham and Isaac. Abraham and Isaac. So I'm sorry, I got distracted. Abraham and Sarah. All right, y'all bear with me tonight. All right, we're going to go to the book of Genesis. And we're going to be looking at Genesis. We're going to actually start at verse 12. I want to walk through a few things in this book. So guys, bear with me as we jump to a few passages in the book of Genesis. And what I want to talk to you about tonight is about waiting, learning how to wait on the Lord. And particularly, I want to look at, the lessons and the blessings while waiting. Amen. So I want to look at the lessons and the blessings while waiting. Want to start at Genesis 12, as I said, and we're actually going to jump to verse 12. So Genesis 12, Genesis 12, and we're going to start at verse 1, actually. Genesis 12, and we're going to actually start at verse 1, and we're going to read a few verses there. So I'm at Genesis 12, verse 1. It says, "Now the Lord had said unto Abraham, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed." So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. Lot was his nephew, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarah, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. So he went to Canaan with Sarai and his brother's son, Lot. And Abram passed through the land unto the place of Sichem, unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed I will give this land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. So I want to first look at these scriptures here in chapter 12. So I just read Genesis 12, verses 1 through 7. And so I want to look at these scriptures in particular, because what we see is God speaking to Abram at this time. And he's telling Abram, you need to go. You need to leave this country where you are, out of your country, from everybody you know, from your kindred, from your father's house. And then he says in verse 1, I want you to go to a land that I will show thee. And so, when we talk about, what God has for us, and sometimes when we are asked to do things and we don't understand it, we truly don't understand it. And sometimes you're like, okay, God, is that you? but so in this case, God is speaking to Abram and he's telling him, I need you to go. But he's promising him something on the other side of that. So he's not just telling him to go. He's not just saying, I need you to go. He's promising him something on the other side of that as well. He's saying in verse 2, leave your country. But then in verse 2, he says, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. Okay. And it says, and we, as we read later, Abram was 75 years old when this happened, when he had to depart from his homeland, and he departed from his kindred and his father's house. He was 75 years old. And so sometimes we're going to be in a place in our lives where it may not be the most optimal time as far as age, as far as circumstances, as far as things we have going on. Everything may not line up the way we want it to, but God has a plan for us. And even in verse 7, what I love about it is, God has a plan for. So what God did with Abram in verse 1, he told him to leave. And then he says, now, when you leave, I got something for you. So I'm not just telling you to go for no reason. So God won't give you instructions when there's nothing behind it. Sometimes we don't know. As a matter of fact, if you look at verse 1, Abram did not really know where he was going. God had not really said where he was going in verse 1. And in verse 1, he just says, I need you to leave. Right. And furthermore, and at the end of verse 1, he says, unto a land that I will show you. Right. And so I may not tell you right now, and I may not show you where I'm taking you right now. I will at some point, I will reveal what I have for you and the plans I have for you. But I may not show it to you right now. And so the first thing that was important for Abram at this point was obedience. We may not know exactly where God is taking us when he tells us to go. He just says, go. I need you to go. Or I need you to do this. Or I need you to bless this person. Or I need you to make this sacrifice. And he may not tell us exactly what the outcome of it will be. But he says, I just need you to go. And what is important is the obedience. So Abram we don't see an exchange of words with Abram and the Lord. We don't see him asking questions. We don't see him saying, I got to say goodbye to my family. We don't see that. Some of that may have transpired, but we don't see that. That's not significant enough to call out. We don't see that. It says, so Abram departed as the Lord has spoken unto him. He did exactly what God told him to do. And again, he was 75. But the first thing to remember in all of this was that Abram was obedient. See, we want what God has for us, and we want the blessings, and we want exactly what he's told us that he's going to give us. I mean, God had promised him a lot. In verse 2, he says, and I will make of you, Abram, I will make a great nation, and I will bless thee, and your name will be great, and you shall be a blessing. That's a tall order. And so we want all those things that God promises us. And this is the first of many promises that God gives Abram and covenants that he has with Abram. But we want those things that God gives us, but we don't want to be obedient. Or we want to compromise with God. Okay, God, I'm leaving, but can I bring this, or can I leave tomorrow instead of today? I got some things I have to finish up. I was supposed to do this as well because this is what I had planned, but our plans are not his plans, right? So Abram, as we can see, the first step was obedience. Now, when he gets to Canaan, I like what happens, there in what we see in the verses that we read. When he gets to Canaan, I like what happens in verse 7. It says, and the Lord appeared unto Abram, and he said, unto thy seed I will give this land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord. This is Abram building the altar, who appeared unto him. What I want to call out is what God says to Abram is, unto thy seed I will give this land. He's already promised Abram that he will have a seed that will inherit this land that he's showing him. What I like about it is God tells him first to go. Okay. And then when he gets there, he shows him exactly what he's going to give him and bless him with. See, sometimes we may not see the blessing when God gives the instruction, but you got to be obedient, right? And you'll see it later. But get this, God showed him the land that he was going to give his seed, Abram's seed, but it wasn't for him to inherit at that time. Abram did not even stay in Canaan after he departed at this very moment. So get this, God is going to tell you to leave sometimes. He's going to tell you to go. He's going to tell you to do something. He'll give you instruction. He'll tell you, I need you to go right now. He will show you what he has for you and what plans he has for your life, but it may not be in that moment. And we've got to understand that sometimes we have to wait on what God is giving us. We have to wait on that blessing that God has for us. He may show it to you. He may give it to you in a vision. He may allow you to touch it and feel it, but you can't have it right now. You can't have it right now. I've got some things I got to stir up first, right? God is saying, I got some things I got to stir up first. I've got some things I got to prepare first before you can get exactly what I have for you. And so that's where we have to understand sometimes that there is a lesson and a blessing in our waiting. We may not get it right away, and we have to learn how to wait. But God was saying it wasn't enough for me to tell you the blessing I have for you and your seed and the generations to come. I want to show you. I want to make it real for you. I want to make it plain for you. Now, when I show you, I don't want you to get too excited because it's not yours yet, but I want you to know that this will be yours. I need you to see what greatness looks like. I need you to see what your future holds. I need you to see that the past, that land that you left, there's so much more I have for you. I need you to see it to make it real for you, because sometimes we won't accept it until we see it. So God was physically showing him the land that he had in store for him, but it wasn't for him to have at that moment. God will sometimes show it to us. He'll give you the vision. He'll show you exactly what it is, that building, that job, whatever it is that God has for you, but it may not be at that moment for you. And in that waiting season, what are you doing? In that season of waiting for that blessing to come, what are you doing? God says, I need for you to see this. I need for you to see the future I have for you. I need you to touch it. I need you to taste it. I need you to smell it, because sometimes that's the only way we get it, right? We want to work by faith, but sometimes we have to see by sight. Let's get real with ourselves. Sometimes we can't even operate by just going off of faith. Sometimes we got to touch it, feel it, taste it, all of that in order to know that it's what God has for us. Okay, God. Okay, I get it now. I get it now. But see, God will show you exactly what he'll lay it out, exactly everything he has for you. But he may not give it to you. Remember, David was chosen at a young age. He was still a shepherd in the fields at his father's house when he was told that he would be king, but it wasn't for him to be king in that moment. God had showed and allowed him to see exactly what was for his future, but it wasn't in that moment that he would be declared and crowned king. See, we have to be able to wait for those things that God has for us. And sometimes he's training us, he's building us, he's growing and grooming us in that moment of waiting until that time comes. God says, I got these treasures laid up for you. I have these treasures stored up for you, but I need you to wait. Now, I'm going to be jumping to a few scriptures, and I want you to work with me, because there's a lot that's happened in Genesis with Abram and Sarah. And so we were just in verse 12, in chapter 12, right? So we were in Genesis 12. But after Genesis 12, like I said, he didn't stay in Canaan, even though God said, leave your country, leave your hometown, leave your father's house. I'm taking you somewhere else. I'm going to show you the land I have for you and your descendants and your seed. But he didn't stay there. He actually ended up, they escaped a famine at that time. And so they had to leave Canaan. And then they actually went to Egypt. In Egypt, they accumulated wealth. And at some point, he left to leave with his wife and his nephew. He separates from his nephew at some point, and he actually goes into battle at some point. So a lot happens after leaving his hometown. So a lot has happened with Abraham as he travels on this journey that God is taking him. And even in all of that, God talks about a generation and a seed, but nothing has happened. He's had no children yet, right? So let's get to chapter 15. So I need you all to jump with me. After Genesis 12, let's jump to Genesis 15. So a few more chapters after that. And we jump to Genesis 15. And if you look at Genesis 15, I want to start at the first verse again. All right. Remember, I told you all these things that transpired after chapter 12. He goes to Canaan. He escapes a famine. He goes to Egypt. He leaves, he and his nephew separate ways. He goes into battle. All these things are happening. And then in chapter 15, we start at verse 1. And that's where God says, and that's where the word says, after these things, all this stuff has happened. After these things, so Genesis 15 and 1, after these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. In verse 2 in chapter 15, it says, and Abram said, Lord God, what will thou give me, seeing I go childless? He's like, I still don't have children. And the steward of my house is this Eliezer, and of Damascus. And Abram said, behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is mine heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, this shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth out of thy own bowels shall be thine heir. In verse 5, it says, and he brought him forth abroad and said, look now toward heaven and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto them, so shall thy seed be. Just look in the stars. In verse 6, it says, in Abram, it says, and he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. So I would just want to point out a few things in these scriptures. Again, I'm building up to something here, right? So we jump from chapter 12, where God is setting the foundation of what promises he has for him, telling him to leave his hometown, allowing him to move forward. Now, in chapter 15, now we get into verse 1. God, he has to remind you of some things now, right? So now God is reminding him. He's been through a lot now. Famine, separates from his family, battle, a lot has happened. And now God I got to remind you of what I have for you. He says, fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward, where God is having to reassure him. He's got to reassure Abram that his possessions will not go to the steward of his home, because here in verse 2, Abram says, I've got a steward, who's here in my home, and he's, traditionally, if I have no children of my own, he will become the heir, right? And so Abram's worried. He's like, God, I know what you promised me, but some years have gone by, right? I was 75 when you told me to leave. I was obedient. And that's how we are sometimes, right? God will give you that promise. You'll be obedient, and some time goes by, nothing happens. And you start to question and you wonder, God, is this still for me? God, do you still have this for me? Because I still have not seen it happen yet. I'm still childless, he says in verse 2, and everything I have is going to go to the steward of my house, as the custom was if he had no children of his own. And so Abram's like, okay, Lord, if that's it, that's it. But God is like, no, he says, no, the one born in my house is mine heir. That's what he's saying. But God says, no, he says, that shall not be your heir. In verse 4, he says, he that shall come out of your own bowels shall be your heir. Your own child will be your heir. I got to remind you of the promise. I said your seed, okay? Let's back up to chapter 12. I said your seed will inherit this land. And so what part of that didn't you understand? I know some time has passed, Abram, but I still have it for you and your household. I still have this for you and your family. I still have this promise for you and your children and your children's children. I still have this promise for you and your spouse. I still have this promise for you, Abram. I haven't forgotten about you. And see, sometimes God has to remind us of the promise while we're waiting, because while we're waiting, a lot of stuff can happen. While we're waiting, we will go through so much stuff, so much chaos, so much confusion, so many battles, right? In the physical sense, in the mental sense, we will go through a lot while we're waiting. And sometimes you may forget the promise. You're like, wait a minute now. Some time's going by, you're like, wait a minute. Oh yeah, that's right, God. Okay, wait, hold on, guys. And like in verse 2, where Abram's like, wait a minute, God. Okay, I'm still going childless, God. I still don't have children. What's going on? Right. And so he challenges God and asks him, and God reminds him. But I love what God does is not only is he reminding him of what he has for him, but sometimes God has to remind you of who he is. In verse 1, he says, fear not, because I know you're afraid. I know you're afraid to step out. I know you're afraid to continue going forward. I know you're afraid that you're not going to get this promise I have for you. I know you're afraid that it's not going to happen as I planned for you. I know you're afraid, but he says, fear not, Abram. And he called him by his name. Fear not, I got you. And he didn't just remind him of the reward he has for you. He reminded him in verse 15, verse 1:15, he says, I am thy shield. I've got you, Abram. I got you. I am your protector. I am your shield. I got you. God will have to remind us sometime of who he is in addition to what he has for us. And so we're going to go through so much in our lives in our process of waiting. We're going to go through so much, but what is the lesson while we're waiting on the blessing? What are we learning while we're waiting? What are we doing while we're waiting? That breakthrough's coming, okay? It's coming. It's coming. You just have to wait. That miracle that you've been waiting for is coming. That healing is coming. You just have to wait. But while you're waiting, what are you doing? Are you praying? Are you still praising him? Are you still worshiping him? Are you still giving him the time that he deserves? While you're waiting, what are you doing? And that's what God wants to know is while you're waiting, what are you doing? While you're waiting, what are you doing? And so God is allowing us to wait sometimes for a reason. He could have done it at the moment he promised. At the moment he gave him the promise, he could have done it. But God will allow us to wait for a reason. And so we have to understand, what is that lesson that he's trying to teach me before I get that blessing while I'm waiting? What is it? And so Abram had to wait. Abram had to wait. And so this is, again, y'all walk with me because I'm jumping through some chapters here because we got a story to tell. This is chapter 15, right? And so Abram, some time has passed. He was promised what he was promised. Really, the covenant initially before he left his home was at the age of 75. And so now, after all of this, more transpires, okay? And I'm not going to get into all of chapter 16, but a lot transpires now after even chapter 15, because I want to end it later. But in chapter 16, and I'm going to summarize it, Sarai, she eventually gets pregnant, okay? But she doesn't get pregnant from Abraham, okay? because Sarah decides that she wants to have her handmaid I'm sorry, Sarah doesn't get pregnant, forgive me. Abraham does have the child, right? Because Sarah decides that she wants to have her handmaid, her servant Hagar, have a child from Abraham. She was like, I can't have children. I can't help you, Abraham. And so I want you to have a child from, Hagar, and I want, you to be blessed. And during that time, in the biblical time, it was very important for women to provide their husbands with sons, because that was needed to allow the continuation of the family history, the genealogy, and just that, having that tradition go on. And while her husband received a son, it wasn't from Sarah. Now his promise of having a son is fulfilled, but Sarah, what about you? You didn't think you were included in that promise that God had for you? When he spoke to Abraham and told them to leave, he was speaking to the both of you, and for you to leave and for you to go with your husband. And so, Sarah, you didn't think that promise was fulfilled for you as well? God intended for both of you to be fulfilled with that. But Sarah, as in those times, it was common if they were barren, and Sarah was barren at that time. It was common for them to allow their handmaids or their concubines or what have you to allow their husbands to procreate. And so that's what happened. And so eventually Hagar has a son, and his name is Ishmael. And Abraham, at this time, he's now 86. So think about that. All this time has transpired between him receiving the promise at 75, did we say? At 75, right? And he receives the promise, and now 86, and he has another son, but it's not the son from from his wife, from Sarah. It's from Hagar. So they have a son. His name is Ishmael. But then, see, that's what happens when you operate out of God's plan, right? So they have this son, and he's, they have a son. His name's Ishmael, and now Hagar's walking around and boasting, and she's proud, and she's walking around and she's feeling herself, right? And Sarah gets mad, right? Understandably so. And so she gets mad, and now Sarah gets upset, and she's like, you got to go. I can't do this. You got to go. You got to go. And so a lot of this drama is happening. And so Sarah creates this drama because you didn't decide to wait. You decided to do things on your own understanding and with your own knowledge and what you thought was best for your husband and what you thought you should be doing. And as a result, the drama happened, right? Hagar's walking around like she's it. And, Sarah didn't like it. And Abram's like, you deal with her. That's your handmaid. You deal with her. So all this is happening in chapter 16. We're not going to go there, but I want us to jump to chapter 17 again. And we're almost done. We're walking through this thing. So we go to chapter 17. And after all this has happened, remember, the son of Sarah and Abraham has not even happened yet. We've got Ishmael born at the age of 86. Abram's 86, and now we're still waiting on that promise. See, sometimes we try to get in God's way when God has a plan for us already. We try to say, okay, Lord, you might need my help. Okay, so I can't do it. Sarah's like, I can't do it. But I'll give you, I'll give you my maid, Hagar, and let it happen through that. But that's not what God intended. And so sometimes God has to make it plain because, okay, he's like, okay, maybe I didn't make it plain. Maybe I didn't make it plain because I didn't mention Sarah's name in all of this, Abraham. I'm talking to you. I'm mentioning your seed. I'm mentioning all of these things. But let me make it plain for you. And this is in chapter 17 is where God makes it plain. But get this, in our waiting, sometimes we will start thinking of things that might make it work, right? What will make it work? God, I know what you told me. And I don't doubt that it's going to happen, but it is not happening the way and in the time I would expect it. So what else would make it work? God, what else? So Abram's already saying, well, I guess my steward at home will be the heir because I'm still childless. So yeah, God, I know I'll have an heir and he'll, have this. Okay, but maybe it'll be him. So that's what Abram's thinking. And then Sarah's like, okay, I can't give you a child. Time has passed by. Abram's now 86, right? When Ishmael's born. And so Sarah's like, okay, maybe it has to be that way. We start trying to get in God's way and thinking, well, you're trying to fulfill half the promise, right? So they know that God said that there would be someone to have generations after generations, but we're trying to figure it out in a different way. So God needs to make it plain for us sometimes. And this is where now he's like, okay, let me make this covenant, not between just you, Abram, but I'm going to make it with Sarah too. Okay. And so now let's go to Genesis 17. If you can flip there with me. Now I'm at Genesis 17 and we're going to look at verses 1 through 6. I'm sorry, 1 through 7. And then I'm going to read a couple more. So let me just read this for you real quick. In Genesis 17, again, now Ishmael's born. They're still trying to figure this. They're still waiting, and time is now elapsed even more. So chapter 17, Genesis verse 1. And when Abram was 90 years old and 9, he's 99 now, the Lord appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty God. Walk before me and be thou perfect. He again is asserting himself to show God, to show Abram who he is. In verse 2, he says, and I will make my covenant between me and thee and will multiply thee exceedingly. And Abram fell on his face and God talked with him saying, as for me, behold, my covenant is with thee and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Again, he's reminding him. In verse 5, neither shall thy name anymore be called Abram. I got to change your name, he says, but thy name shall be Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee. Okay, and in verse 5, it says, neither shall thy name anymore be called Abram, as I said, but thy name shall be Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee. And you know why he called him that, right? Because he's trying to tell him, do you know what your name is? Do you know what your name is? Many times people in biblical, their names were purposeful. And so Abram's name meant exactly that, father of generations. And so he's saying, let me call you Abraham, because I need to let you know who you are. In verse 6, he says, I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make thee nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. I'm going to birth kings from you. Okay. In verse 7, he says, and I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee. And I'm going to skip now after verse 7. Let me go to verses 15 and 16, because I want to show you that God is going to make it plain for you sometimes. Now he's saying, okay, Abram, I got you. Now let's go to Sarah. He says, and God said unto Abraham, right, as for Sarai, thy wife, thou shalt now call her name Sarah, but Sarah shall be her name. So you shall not call her Sarai anymore, but Sarah shall be her name. And I will bless her and give thee a son also of her. Yea, I will bless her. And she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. I've got royalty coming from both of you. So let me make it plain for you in case you didn't get it the first time. So God will try to make this thing plain for you sometimes when we try to intervene and get in the way of what God has for us. He says, let me make it plain for you. This covenant is not just between you and me, Abraham. I got this thing set up for you and your wife. So now Sarai no longer will be her name, but now her name is going to be Sarah. God is saying, when I have a plan for you, it doesn't just include you. I've got this thing for your whole household. I've got this thing for your whole family. I've got this thing for your spouse and for your children and your children's children. I want to bless you all immensely. So in chapter 17, he has to make it plain now. So now his covenant is expanded to say, let me make this plain for you. Because in the first few chapters ahead, maybe you didn't get it. And now you're 99. Now you're 99 years old. And so what happens, and we're going to fast forward, he's 99 years old. And later on, as you read more, you'll see that he tells him in a year from now. So now I'm going to give you a timeline. You've waited. Okay, now let me tell you, I'm going to make it plain for you. This includes you and Sarah, you and your wife. Okay. And now let me give you a specific timeline. He's 99 years old at this time. And he says, in a year from now, he tells him later, you will have a son, you and her. So let's get that clear. You and her will have a son. And he tells them both. And so now so Sarah overhears it as well later. But so now the vision is plain and clear what God has for them both. He had to step in to reassure them, to reassure Abraham after they tried to do things on their own. See, sometimes we try to get in God's way, and we know the promise he has for us. We know what he wants for us, but we're waiting so long. Sometimes we get impatient. We're waiting so long. Sometimes we don't know if it's going to happen. Sarah and Abraham eventually have their son after that year that God had promised, and they named him Isaac. And that is the son that God had promised them. That is the son that God had mentioned, that will be your seed. And that will be who will take this land. And I have this land for your seed and your generations. And so they eventually have their son. And so at this time now, by this time, Abraham is 100 and Sarah is 90. And so you see why they doubted God. And their age. And if you're thinking about it in the literal sense, in the physical sense, that's just not possible. 90 years old, she's bearing children, and at 100 years old, But the promise was given at 75. And even then, if Abraham was 75 and Sarah was 65, they were still older in age. And so sometimes God will show you things in a moment where it seems like it's not possible. Because sometimes he's doing that intentionally because he needs you to know. He needs you to know that I can do this. Is anything impossible? Is anything too hard for God? He needs you to know that I can do this despite what the world says, despite what man says, despite what law says, despite what the physical components of everything says. He needs you to know that he can still do this. And he changed their names. You see, when God changes our names, as he did with Abraham and Sarah, he's not just changing the name that man will call you. He's changing your future. He's changing that season that you're in. He's changing whatever it is that man or the world has defined you as. He's changing you. He told Abraham, you are going to be the father of a multitude. That's what his name meant. So he says, I'm changing your name because I wanted to represent what I have for you. What I have for you. When God changes our name, not just in that literal sense, he doesn't just change the label or what is seen on the outside. But don't you know he's working some things out on the inside? He's working some things out on the inside. And in the case of Sarah, he was not just changing her name, the label, but he was changing her physical composition from going from a barren state to a fruitful state. God will take you out of that barren season that you're in. He'll take you out of that barren moment that you're in, at that moment where you don't see anything growing, that you don't see anything prospering. He can take you out of that. But let me remind you and back you all the way up to where we started in chapter 12, where when God told Abraham to leave, he left in obedience. And so remember the promise God has for us. He has all these things for us. He has all those things laid out for us, but we got work to do in it too. He did it in obedience. Is anything too hard for God? That's what God had to tell him. Is anything too hard for me? Do you doubt me? I'm going to step in when man says step out. I'm going to step in when man steps away. I'm going to step in when man walks away. I'm going to step in because I want you to know I did this. I'm going to step in because I need you to know that it was me and not them. I need you to know that I did it. That's when he steps in. But in all that time, we have to wait patiently. And it's hard. Let's be honest. It's hard to wait when you don't see it happening. It is hard to wait. But we have to learn how to wait, even in our moment, because God has something in store for us and we may not see it at the time. And he may, just like he did with Abraham, he showed him exactly the land that he had for him, but it wasn't time for him to receive it. God has it for you. God has it for you. God has it for you. But we have to learn how to wait. Isaiah 40:31 says, but those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. The clause in that, all of that was those who wait on the Lord. Those who wait on the Lord. So there's a condition that we have to do in order to get all that he has after that. And I love it where it says it will renew their strength. You got that strength in you. The renewal means you've had it there. Maybe he needs to replenish it. You've gotten tired from waiting. You've gotten burned out. You're physically and emotionally incapable anymore to do anything. And you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting for that breakthrough. You're waiting for that miracle. You're waiting for that healing. But it says they that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. I know you've got that strength in you because he wouldn't have said renew. Renew means I'm giving you something that you already have. I'll give it back to you. I'm going to replenish it. I know you have it in you, but this world is stripping it from you. The time that you have to wait is stripping it from you. The turmoil you have is stripping it from, the uncertainty is stripping it from you. But I'm going to renew your strength back. And when I do, you're going to mount up with wings like eagles. When you run, you will not get weary. And when you walk, you will not faint. That is his promise to us. That is his promise to us. We have to learn to wait wait while we're waiting and there's a lesson in the blessing. Amen. There's a lesson and a blessing in our waiting if we just learn how to wait. Abraham and Sarah, they received their blessing, and it took 25 years from the time of the promise that we read in chapters 12. Abraham was 75 up until the time that he had Isaac. They had Isaac when he was 100. So 25 years had elapsed. That's a long time. And for us, that's a quarter of a century, right? So that's a long time. And they were well in their age, right, when they waited. What will we do when we wait? What are you doing now while you're waiting for that breakthrough, for that next step in your life, that next chapter in your life? What are you doing while you're waiting? That's what's important, is that we make sure that we're doing something while we're waiting, not worrying, not walking away from God. Don't do those. Replace the walking away, replace the worrying with worship. Replace that. While we're waiting, you should be worshiping. Don't walk away from them. Don't get angry. Easier said than done. But when you feel that need to get in God's way, remember what the consequences could be, and they may not work in your favor. And so Abraham had to learn that it may not be in your favor. But when he does have it for you, he will have it for you as he promised. I'm going to sign off from Book Club, and I pray that you all were blessed and you received something out of the lesson today. Remember that while you're waiting, there's a lesson and a blessing in it. I pray that you all are safe, and I pray that you all are blessed. Thank you and good night.